Okay, today we're going to be taking a look at this box on Hack the Box. I'm not going to pretend that I know how to pronounce this. Let's go with Monteverde, or I don't know, it's a foreign name. So yeah, we're going to take a look at this one and see if we can get the user and the root flag. Spoiler alert, we did get the user and the root flag, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be making this video. I actually already did this on my own time and it took quite a long time to figure a few things out. And then I'm kind of going back now and recording a video. I will explain kind of things that tripped me up the first time and also my thought process as I'm going through things. But yeah, this isn't going to be kind of a first go at this where you see me make every single mistake and it takes hours, because that's not particularly fun to watch, I don't think. First thing we're going to do, as always, is nmap. Now, I'm only going to do the first 6,000 ports to start with. And that is because it takes a very long time. I can't type apparently. It takes a very long time to do like a full scan of all 65,000 ports. And to be honest, most of the time there isn't anything interesting above 6,000. So we're going to do the first 6,000. If we don't find anything interesting, we would then move on. Or if we got stuck at some point, we'd then do the rest of the ports. But for now, because I've already done this machine, I know that we don't need to go above that anyway. So yeah, we're going to do this. So we're all finished now. Let's take a look at some of the interesting ports here. The first one that jumps out to me is 389, because that is LDAP, which basically means Active Directory. You can have LDAP without Active Directory, but for the most part, that's going to mean that this is probably a domain controller, especially when we've got port 53, which is DNS. I don't know why they call it domain, not DNS there, but yeah, DNS server and LDAP ports, and also global catalog ports, all basically makes me think this is an Active Directory domain controller. If you're not familiar with Active Directory, it's basically the central database where all users, passwords, groups, everything like that is stored, along with plenty of other stuff. But in a Windows network, it's kind of the central thing that holds everything, if you like. So it's a very important thing for us to try and attack. We've also got this one, which is the Windows RM or PowerShell remoting. But if we try to get in there now with enter PS session, we haven't got any credentials, so we'll just try and do that and it'll fail because we don't have access. The other interesting port here is 445, which means there's probably an SMB file share on there. Again, if we try and go to that now, it'll just say access denied or prompt us for credentials. So the only thing we've kind of got to look at straight away is LDAP. So I'll open the built-in LDP tool. This is a Microsoft tool. I can't actually remember if it is built into the OS or if I had to download it years ago, but it's a Microsoft official tool for LDAP queries. I'm sure there's equivalents on Linux, but yeah. If we just put the server name in, it'll connect, and you'll see straight away, even though we're just connecting as an anonymous user, we've not actually supplied any credentials yet, we get some information. Mainly, we get a domain name, and then in Active Directory, the domain name is kind of structured like this for path names. So if we want to actually do a search, we can put the domain name in there in the format that it needs to be structured in, and then search for all user accounts. This will actually find computer accounts as well, which is kind of unintuitive, but one of those oddities in Active Directory that you get used to. There is a separate LDAP query you can use just to get user accounts, but it's a little bit more convoluted, not as easy to remember as that. So yeah, this will give us a list of user accounts. If we scroll up, we should see how many we actually got. Yeah, 11 entries. So we found 11 user accounts. So interesting things to look at normally would be the SAM account name. That's basically the username. So that's the username that you log on with. That one's not a good example because it's like a service account, but yeah, here we go. So mhope is a username. You can also use this as well as a username to fully qualify it with the domain name. But yeah, what we need to do first is narrow down which user accounts we should actually be looking at. Oh, another interesting thing that I noticed when I first did this was we've got this path here. If you try and go to that, you'll see that again we need credentials at this point, so we can't get in there at the moment, but it's something to note is that there's a hidden share. The dollar means that it's a hidden share, so we wouldn't see that unless we knew about it. So we need to narrow down which user accounts we're interested in, because there's quite a few there, and to do that we can do a different LDAP search. Still want to find users, but we'll also add an extra parameter, which is going to be the last logon timestamp attribute. And we'll say when it's larger than or equal to 1. So basically when a user logs on, this attribute gets updated with the date and time that they logged on. It's stored as a number, so we'll just do larger than or equal to 1, because then anyone that's got a 0, that basically means they've never logged on. This last logon attribute is stored in the same way. They both get updated in slightly different ways, the last logon and last logon timestamp attribute, but yeah, they're essentially the same attribute. But we'll do last logon timestamp. And now we should see we get a lot less users returned. How many did we get that time? We got 4. So we've got this user account here to try and basically guess credentials for at this point because we don't have any other option. So that's his username. And we've got this SA batch jobs username, which again was some kind of name. Yep, so that is the username. This doesn't have to match the username, by the way. The CN, the common name, doesn't have to match the username, but in most of these cases it does. This one is actually a computer account, so we can ignore that. We can see that easily because it's in the domain controllers OU. And then we've got this mhope account down here. So if we just try and go to the root of this server, basically the SMB share, it should prompt us for credentials because we're just logging on anonymously at the moment. And as we expected, we get prompted for credentials. Now, I'm not going to bore you with me trying loads of different passwords and stuff, but basically it turned out the SA batch jobs account has the password set to the same as the username. So SA batch jobs, all the same capitals and everything. Let me make sure I actually got that correct. Yes, we got all the capitals correct. So if we enter that. Now I've seen some people on the forums complaining that that first part is just a guessing game. But you know, it is a very easy guessing game. A lot of people are getting hung up on running like password crackers and stuff and running all the common word lists and all that stuff. Sometimes you've got to just try the obvious stuff first, try it manually, or if you really want to script it, you can script it. But like I say, with only 3 user accounts once you take out that domain controller, with only 3 user accounts to try, I just manually tried a few obvious passwords. And then, anyway, we end up here, nothing useful in any of these. So we go back to that hidden share that we found earlier, which was mentioned in Mike Hope's user account here. So if we try and go to that, so /users $, again the $, just means it's a hidden share, which is why we don't see it in this list here. And we can successfully get into there. I didn't expect to actually be able to access any of these folders because they have usernames on. I assumed they would be locked to each user account, but they're not. We can get in and have a look around. Basically, the only thing of any interest when we have a look around is this. So if we open this up, we can see that in there is a password. So there's no hint at what exactly this is a password for or who this is for, other than the fact that it's in this mhope user account folder. So if we copy that, I've saved this PowerShell command that we're going to use later just to save me having to type it all out, but we'll copy that to our notes for this machine, and we're going to assume that it's for this mhope user account. So when I was doing this the first time, I connected back to this share using the mhope credentials, which on Windows is a little bit awkward to do. If you do that, you'll see that we've already got a connection remembered for this server, so we have to delete that. If I can type. Yes, we want to delete, and then do it again for the new credentials. So let's just do actually $, again. And we'll say user mhope, and then it'll prompt us for the password. And we can type the password in or copy and paste the password. And it will connect. So now when we access that folder again, or that whole share, now we're doing it as this mhope user account. But that didn't allow me to access anything new. There was no new areas I could get into on the SMB share. So I turned my attention back to LDAP, did an LDAP bind with those credentials. So again, you see I've already got that in there. Let's paste this password in. And you'll see now we get authenticated as mhope. Again, did another search, didn't find anything else new that I couldn't see before. So that led me on to going back to the port scan list and remembering that we have the PowerShell port. So if we try and do what we did before, enter PS session, but this time we'll do credential mhope and then paste its password. You can see that we now actually get access when it works. It takes its time. There we go, so we're in. So you can see files and folders in there. And somebody on this machine has left some executables on there. They're not supposed to be on there, but obviously somebody who's attacking this machine at the moment has dumped them there and forgot to get rid of them. Now there was actually one other way we could have known that this mhope account had access to PowerShell, and that is because if we look at his member of, which tells you the groups that the account is a member of, we can see he's a member of Azure admins and also a member of remote management users. Now generally, if anyone's a member of the remote management users group, that means they've got permission to use PowerShell to connect remotely to this machine. So anyway, yeah, now that we're in here, we can cd into the desktop, or change directory into the desktop, and do an ls, and we should find the user flag. So we can do get content user.txt, and we get the user flag. So yeah, pretty straightforward, and now we can move on to root. So to get the root flag, we already noticed that this user is a member of the Azure admins group, so that gives us a hint straight away. But also, if we go into the C drive and look around program files, when it eventually autocompletes for me, we can see that there's a load of Azure stuff in here. So again, that's a big hint that that's probably the thing that we need to attack, because there's not really a lot else on here other than SQL Server stands out to me a little bit. It's probably a database running on here, and yeah, all this Azure stuff. Obviously, it takes a bit of time to do some Googling and searching around for Azure AD sync exploits or Azure exploits in general. Reading the thread on the forum as well helped give me a few tips. But essentially, in the end, I stumbled across some slides that led me to this video, which is basically someone explaining how to get plain text credentials out of the database where Azure stores, well, not Azure, but the Azure AD Connect system stores its credentials. So just a quick summary, the way it works is on the server where you're running the Azure AD Connect software, that needs to be able to access your local domain, the Active Directory stuff, all this that we were looking at, needs to be able to access this to grab usernames and passwords and stuff to send them up to the Azure cloud domain, essentially, so that it can synchronize everything. So it needs to store those credentials somewhere, and it does that in an SQL database. Now this talk explains in detail how they sort of reverse engineered it to figure out where that was stored and how it's encrypted and everything. They actually also provided some example code. There's a repository here on GitHub. I'll leave all the links to these things in the description of the video. But yeah, there's a few different ways of doing it. And essentially, they've written some code that does it for you. It connects to, what they've done is assume that it's on a local DB database, which is like a sort of SQL file-based database rather than a full SQL server instance, and then just runs a few commands, does the decryption, and then outputs the password. Somebody else has taken that a step further and written a PowerShell script that does basically the same thing, but also gives you the domain and the username, and just presents it in a bit of a nicer format. You get this nice output. It's literally just the username and password. They go on to do all sorts of other stuff as well. But basically what I did the first time I attacked this was to just copy and paste this script, run it on this server through the PowerShell remoting setup that we've got here. And it didn't work at first because, like I say, the SQL database on this server is not actually running in this local DB instance that they're assuming it is. It's not using this connection string. So after a lot of messing around, I finally realized that it's actually running on a full SQL instance. I'll be honest, I can't remember exactly how I came to that conclusion. I think it was just from looking for the MDB files or the MDF files, whatever they are. Where is it? Somebody mentions it. Oh yeah, in this talk they mentioned that it's stored in this adsync.mdf file. I couldn't find that file anywhere on this server. So that, along with the fact that SQL Server is installed and running a few other enumeration commands just to see what SQL databases and instances were running, eventually led me to believe that it's hosted on the full SQL Server instance, which means this connection string they're using here doesn't work, because this is just trying to use basically the MDF file rather than a full SQL instance. So if we go over to the connectionstrings.com website and then go to SQL Server, it tells you exactly what you need to use for a full-blown instance of SQL Server. Now we want to use this trusted connection version because that basically means that we use Windows authentication, kind of single sign-on basically to log us into the database, so we don't need any credentials, assuming that this account we're logged on as, mhope, has permission to access the database, which it does. So yeah, we can just copy and paste that into the PowerShell example, change a few things to make it actually use our server and our database name, and then we're good to go. Now what I decided to do once I'd got that all up and running was actually write my own VB.NET program that basically does the same thing, heavily based off what these guys have done in the PowerShell script and also this C# example. But yeah, just made it a bit simpler to use and compiled it into an executable. Copied that executable over to the target machine, so let's do that now. That's what I saved this command for. You can download this, by the way. I'll leave a link. I've written a blog post that explains how to use it and explains why I did it and how I did it. You can download it, and basically you just run it on its own, and it'll try and do the same as what these examples are doing, where they just use the local DB instance. Or you can do -full SQL, and it'll use the proper connection string that we need for this server. So if we copy that over to the remote machine, this is a very handy feature of PowerShell, is that you can copy files to a PowerShell session, like a remote session. So if we just call this sesh, do new PS session, and again we'll do the same thing that we did before, use credentials, mhope, put his password in. So that's going to create as a new PowerShell session, store it in this sesh variable, and then we can copy files to that sesh variable, that PowerShell session. So copy that over into the temp folder in his profile. I generally try and avoid copying stuff to these machines because, like we saw at the start, somebody had just left some files laying around. It kind of gives things away or causes problems for other people. So I'll generally copy them to some sort of fairly obscure location. So now we can enter that session that we created. Yeah, copy it to some fairly obscure location and then delete it once it's done. So if we go into there and then just run ls to make sure it's in there. Yep, it's there. Now, one thing about this program is that it needs to be run from, or at least have access to, essentially the working folder needs to be this AD-sync bin folder because it relies on some DLLs and things that are in there. So if we go to program files, Microsoft AD-sync, I think it was, and there is, yep, there's a bin folder in there. If we go to that, and then we run the program, so we've got to run it from where we just stored it. And then because we know it's the full SQL instance that we want, if we do that, it should, no, it can't run. Right, things never go smoothly, do they, when you're trying to demonstrate them? I figured it out, and basically what was happening was we didn't have the encrypt DLL file in there, in the same folder that I've copied my program to. I didn't actually realize that needed to be in there because we've got our working directory set to this bin folder which has that file in it. So that's kind of weird that it's not finding that. And also what's even more weird is that if we go out of this bin folder and then try and run the program, I'm not going to do it actually because it takes ages for it to crash, but it'll crash with saying it can't find this encrypt DLL file, even though it's there. So yeah, if the encrypt file isn't in the same folder that the program's being run from, it'll say it can't find it. But also if you don't have your current directory set to this bin folder, then it'll struggle to find it. So it's kind of weird. I don't know which one of them it's using. It seems to need both of them, which doesn't make any sense, but I'll look into that on my own time. And for now, all we need to know is that if we run the program from there, so AD decrypt, or again, this is what happens pretty much when you run the PowerShell command once you've got the PowerShell script from here. Once you've got the connection string sorted out, this gives you a very similar result. But if we run my little program with the full SQL flag, to tell it not to use this connection string that they're using, tell it to use the full fat SQL connection string. You can see once it's finished running, we get literally just the username and password in plain text because it's extracted it from the SQL database, used that encrypt DLL to decrypt it. And again, I can't take any credit for figuring out how to do all that. That was figured out by these guys. Again, watch this YouTube video if you want to understand the inner workings of it. But for now, we've got basically a very simple to use, as long as you've got your DLLs in the right place, simple to use program that just gives us domain admin credentials. So yeah, normally I think in a real world setup, this wouldn't necessarily be the actual domain administrator account. It would just be some service account, although it would still have permission to read and replicate passwords and things from AD, so it's still very powerful. But in this case, to make it a bit easier for the Hack the Box challenge, they've used the domain admin credentials. So now basically we can exit this PowerShell session and create a new one for the admin. And I mean, I'm sure you know exactly where this is going, but if we do that, should have maybe copied that first. Paste that in there. Now we can log in as admin. And we also must remember to delete these files in a second because we don't want anyone else finding them and just running that and instantly having access. But yeah, if we go to the desktop, we can see we've got the root flag there, so we can just read the contents of that. and complete the box. But yeah, just to tidy up, we're going to remove that AD decrypt file and also the mcrypt DLL. So yeah, that is the Monteverde, or whatever we're calling it, box. I don't know exactly how it was pronounced. That's the greatest mystery of this box, really, is how to pronounce it. But yeah, that was it. Pretty simple. Once you find the stuff online, again, I actually found this video from finding some slides on slideshare.com or something, that then led me to the video and then led me to this. So yeah, with a bit of Googling, it didn't take too long to find. And yeah, overall, once you find this stuff, it's a very easy box, especially now that I've written the program that doesn't even need you to figure out what the correct connection string is. You can just try it without the full SQL flag and try it with it, and one of them is going to work pretty much. But yeah, that's it. Let me know if you've got any feedback, if there's anything that you'd like me to explain more in future videos. If you think there's things that I explained too much and I didn't need to go through everything in such detail, let me know. Also, keen to hear how other people did this box, because to be honest, that's the best thing about completing a box, is getting the flag and then being able to read other people's write-ups and things like that. So keen to see what other people did. So let me know in the comments if you've done this box in a slightly different way.